we are delighted to welcome Group Director for Strategy and Research at Ofcom, Choung.
Brilliant. Well, I am delighted to be back at the UK IGF, so thank you very much for having me. Today's meeting has covered a fascinating and important range of topics, from digital inclusion to the governance of AI and the challenges of mis- and disinformation. Those are issues that we also wrestle with at Ofcom, the UK's converged communications regulator. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to focus on our media use and news in particular, stepping through how consumers' use of media and news consumption is evolving, why I think that raises questions for us to tackle together, and what that might mean for governance or indeed regulation. Now, as we think about our digital future, as Albert Einstein once said, if you want to know the future, look at the past. And fortunately, at Ofcom, we now have 20 years of past and a lot of data. And it's extraordinary to think just how much has changed over that time, primarily due, of course, to how the internet age has transformed society. Okay, so following the lead from our last panel, I'm going to take us back about 20 years to when Ofcom was founded in 2003. Back then, home internet access was below 50% of households, and only 6% had a broadband service. So we were typically talking dial-up, if you remember those days. Internet operators were just starting to develop content for mobile phones. Three launched the first UK 3G network in 2003. Music downloads were, well, not always legal, with downloads often being burnt onto a CD. And digital switchover was yet to happen, so broadcast TV was an all-analog signal. Even just a few years later, as we stepped into the internet age, a few product launches really defined, I think, the media world that we now live in. YouTube in 2005, videos on the internet and all those infamous cat videos. The iPhone in 2007, the internet in our pockets. Even then, the ability to reach a fifth of people on the planet. And the BBC iPlayer in 2007, the internet on our TVs. 1,500 hours at launch, equivalent to about 500 VHS tapes. And so what does that mean for our lives today? Well, rapid technology development, faster networks, cloud-based computing, greater processing power and memory on devices, coupled with evolving business models, has, of course, provided us with incredible choice. Anywhere, anytime, and anything. Anywhere, because the smartphone is now pretty ubiquitous, enabling us to engage in media, well, not just media, of course, a much, much broader range of services while we're on the go. Anytime, well, with video on demand, we're no longer beholden to a linear schedule, with some notable exceptions such as live events, offering us huge choice and flexibility. And anything. The internet, as we've heard earlier today, has democratized content creation, giving rise to user-generated content alongside professional. For example, with more than 500 hours of content uploaded onto YouTube every minute. It's effectively limitless. All that is reflected in the time we spend on mobile devices. So our last research suggests that's about 86% of our time, compared to 14% on laptops and desktops or 10% on tablets. And unsurprisingly, services developed for mobile phones are among the most viewed. And of course, it's not just about devices, it's also about demographics. That technology-driven choice means we can all do different things, leading to greater fragmentation of habits, as I suspect we're all familiar with simply from looking at our own families. Let me give you one example, as you see on the slide, from traditional media. When it comes to broadcast TV, while viewing by those aged 65 and over has only declined marginally in the last 10 years, since 2013, viewing by 16 to 24-year-olds has fallen by 78%. That's from 2 hours and 29 minutes to just 33 minutes last year. Now, as the media regulator, how people get access to news is a key question for us. Trusted and accurate news is particularly important to our democracy in the context of mis- and disinformation, as we've already heard this afternoon. At the risk of another history lesson, I think it's instructive just to reflect on how information has been distributed, not just over the last 20 years, but last 600 years. If we go back to 1440, of course, Gutenberg invented the movable type printing press. That was an astonishing technological breakthrough, leading to the Renaissance in introducing the era of mass communication, fundamentally altering the structure of society. The relatively unrestricted circulation of information and sharp increase in literacy broke the monopoly of the literate elite on education and learning. And that democratization of distribution of information has, of course, been a good thing, amongst other things, enabling the rise of newspapers on the right of this slide that have helped hold our politicians and leaders to account over recent decades. Now, of course, technological developments don't stand still. The BBC began its first daily radio broadcast in 1922, just over 100 years ago, with its first TV broadcast from its own studios following a decade later in 1932. And that, of course, set the primary means of distributing news for the majority of most of our lifetimes. And so onwards, after a quiet first decade or so for the public internet, the last 20 years has shown the transformational power of the internet as a means of distributing information, leaving almost no corner of the economy untouched, including, of course, the distribution of news. This is data on the slide from our annual news consumption report, which we published in September. And it reveals that online news sources are now as widely used as TV for news. That marks a generational shift in the balance of news media. More than half of UK adults now use platforms such as Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram to access news. But of course, there continues to be a big difference by age groups. For example, 82% of 16 to 24-year-olds, that compares to only 28% of those 55 and over, use social media for news. But TV and radio news continue to play a critical role, and they are rated much more favorably for accuracy, trust, and impartiality. For example, TV is much more trusted than social media, at about 70% for accuracy and trust compared to 43%. Similarly, 61% rate TV highly for impartiality compared to 42% for social media. Okay, actually I may just click back there for the moment. So the research is fascinating, but the really interesting part is, of course, the so what. Well, if I take a step back and think a little bit about why do we regulate then? And at the risk of getting a little technical, Parliament asks regulators to act when it's clear that markets on their own can't deliver what the country and its consumers and citizens need. Broadly, I think there can be three reasons why this might be the case. First, economic regulation. Most economic regulation arose in the 1980s when major public utilities were privatized. That, of course, created companies that were monopolies. Economic regulation, such as in Ofcom's case, fixed telecoms regulation, was established to mimic competition in the discipline that it brings. Second, ensuring minimum standards. This is all about setting a level playing field that everyone can rely on and preventing a race to the bottom that could otherwise harm consumers. In Ofcom, that includes things like our online safety regime, ensuring standards on TV and radio, and oversight of the telecoms security regime. And third, delivering public goods. Regulation is sometimes used to secure services that wouldn't otherwise be provided by the market. The Postal Universal Service obligation and the delivery of public service obligations by some of our broadcasters are examples that Ofcom oversees. So when it comes to news, there's both regulation on TV and radio to ensure minimum standards, protecting against harmful content, and because it's at the heart of public service media, delivering a public good, which is of benefit to society as a whole, not just to me as an individual. Now, as we've seen in the internet age, our engagement with news is changing. The democratization of content creation serves us well in all sorts of respects, for example, enhancing the diversity of voices that we can engage in. But it's not without its challenges. In a world of effectively limitless content, it'd be really easy to get lost. Imagine a World Wide Web with no search engine. I mean, personally, I'm not very good at guessing URLs, so I don't think I'd get very far. But in our internet age, online intermediaries, by which I mean search engines, social media sites or apps, and news aggregators, make sense of this massive content and provide order so it's not a complete free-for-all. But they also exert a significant influence on how we read online news, as our research published back in March indicates. Here are 3 findings that we published. First, the ranking of news content in a social media feed has a substantial impact on the amount of time that people spend viewing, reading, and engaging with news content. Second, social media platforms expose people to a lot of different news outlets, but they tend to expose them to a narrower range of news topics than they might encounter on more traditional news websites. And our research suggests that people who get most of their news from social media are more polarized and less trusting of democracy. Third, people have limited control over their social media feeds, and understanding consumer or readers' preferences now sits with the online intermediaries rather more than, say, the news providers. At one level, all of that might seem not particularly surprising in a world not of content scarcity, but rather attention scarcity. With effectively limitless content and advertising-driven business models, holding readers' attention is a big part of profitability if you're trying to sell ads. And that might be achieved more effectively by AI and algorithmic content recommendation engines serving up content that drives engagement, possibly including false information, rather than trusted and accurate news. So in the age of generative AI, arguably these challenges are even more complex. I mean, I have no doubt that there are huge benefits, as we were hearing from the earlier panel, of this technology, for example, to industry. Greater efficiency, synthesis of large volumes of information, automatic translation of news into different languages, and so to society as a whole. But the technology also enables easier generation of disinformation and convincingly fake content, and so there are clear risks. And as we heard earlier this afternoon, I think there are various issues that we need to engage with. For example, ensuring that training data reflects quality content in news and isn't excessively biased, that issues of copyright and intellectual property are addressed, and of course the associated questions when it comes to things like appropriate remuneration. Finally, so what does this mean for governance or regulation? Well, one of our ambitions at Ofcom is for all of us to have media we trust and value. That's a big challenge. But here are a few steps that we are taking. Understanding people, consumer behaviors, and attitudes remain foundational. That's why we continue to invest in our research reports like Media Nations, Online Nation, or indeed our news consumption report that I've referred to. We need to ensure that people have the ability to navigate and evaluate online services critically. Advanced media literacy is crucial to ensuring that people can navigate content safely and flourish online. That's one of the reasons why we've invested in our Making Sense of Media program. And we published our 3-year media literacy strategy just about a month ago. We will continue to support the availability and prominence of good content, if I can call it that, the delivery of public goods, including trusted and accurate news and quality investigative journalism. The Broadcasting Code sets out the requirements of duly accurate and duly impartial news on broadcasters, and we're now thinking about how that might need to evolve or be done to support trusted and accurate news looking forwards. That's one of the questions we are looking at in our public service media review. And through our new duties for online safety, platforms, including social media sites, are required to take steps to prevent the spread of illegal material and mitigate the risks to the safety of people in the UK. And that does include false communications intended to cause harm. First, firms must assess the risks of illegal harms on their platforms, and our codes will come into place at the turn of this year, which is when they will need to get on with that, if not before. These are complex challenges, indeed global ones, that require us to come together to solve. I think global cooperation is essential because these are challenges that are, of course, common to every country, and online intermediaries and platforms are active globally. Multi-stakeholder cooperation is also necessary to bring together different perspectives on these multifaceted challenges, not just regulators and governments, but industry, civil society, academia, and others. We will only meet these challenges if we work together effectively, so I very much look forward to continuing our work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we have time for a brief Q&A until 15:15.
Great.
So who would like to field a question? Yes, you at the back.
Quite critically, and clearly it's not something you could do anything about, but the proof or the ability to prove that intent to cause harm was there is going to be a really difficult one. I think that's been commented on by quite a number of folk and organisations over this last year. One, of course, demonstrating or providing that proof and evidence is going to take quite a lot and presumably cost quite a lot. Do you have the resources? And secondly, are you lobbying government to change from proof to actually just demonstrating harm has been caused rather than intent? Thank you.
There's a good couple of questions in there. I mean, I agree. So the distinction between mis and disinformation is, of course, about intent, and that is remarkably difficult in a lot of circumstances to decipher. And I'm very conscious that in passing the Online Safety Act, Parliament very much weighed up various factors, and as we've discussed earlier today, the importance of freedom of expression with protecting people, consumers, and essentially have got to where they have in the Online Safety Act, which does not, to be direct, give us a huge amount in terms of mis or disinformation. I'm personally comfortable that that's Parliament's decision. And of course, any amendments is a question for government, and I know Baroness Jones spoke about that this morning. But we do think that we are well-resourced for what is, of course, a very significant and challenging task ahead of us. We have had the benefit of being able to attract some great talent, not just from online platforms, but also from academia and civil society and a genuinely diverse set of individuals. So compared to other regimes in the world, I actually think we have some very capable individuals, including on the technology side, where we're investing in things like computer vision around questions of facial age estimation, which is really important for our protection of children work around age assurance, or other technologies around NLP, natural language processing, and various things which become important given the scale of our work in the regime, where we will have to rely on technology and using the likes of AI positively as part of the solution.
Hello, hi. Gabriel Whitehead, self-directed researcher. I was wondering, actually, it was a question with a thought. Social media and most of the service provided by the internet is a money-driven business, and public interest is not money business. So I wonder, it's a big challenge for government to come together with the protocols and the measures. For example, I was wondering if there is there any possibility that the technology could develop a sort of like a black box for example, on an airplane, you have a black box there in order to record anything that might be necessary for you to investigate after a major incident. So what if we think of developing a sort of like guardian system to definitely like safeguard children and vulnerable people, also for the interest of the DBS and disclosure bearing service. They have to sort of support business and make sure that hiring and recruitment people, they are making the right decision, even though people might not be convicted for hate online or any sort of criminal activity, but at least the criminal tendencies and criminal intent that people might bear. That's the question.
Thank you. There's a lot of issues in there. I may attempt to tackle 2 points, I suppose. So, yes, as I was trying to say, I think the reason why you end up thinking about regulation or some sort of intervention is because there's a misalignment between business models and the commercial imperatives, and then, of course, the outcomes that you want to achieve. And we could talk about that further. But yeah, I think the business models as they stand drive the incentives in a way which doesn't necessarily achieve what we would want to see, which is why, of course, Parliament is legislated. Then to, I guess, the second part of your question, fundamentally, I think the Online Safety Act is pointed in the right direction. This is a system, essentially, of risk assessment, which is placed on the platforms and is about systems and processes. So it's all about them taking responsibility for what goes on their platforms and conducting risk assessments, and then demonstrating a degree of transparency so that we understand what's going on. So whilst, it's not necessarily sexy in the arsenal of a regulator, things like information discovery powers are really important, because there's such an informational asymmetry where unless you can legally require them to show you what's going on, and even then there are challenges, the task is almost impossible. So there's a journey. There's a long way to go, but I think we're heading in a positive direction.
Thank you very much.
An online question.
Yeah, we have an online question from Suvash. So he has said that balancing regulation amongst service providers, consumers, and maintaining compliance is challenging. How is Ofcom handling this?
Well, I certainly agree with the sentiment. I think when I sometimes ask myself, why did Parliament decide to give us these duties? I suspect the answer is because we've got a pretty good track record with trying to weigh up these considerations. So freedom of expression and protecting audiences, that is something that the broadcasting regime has sought to maintain. And if you look at kind of the number of complaints that we get versus the cases that we take forward, we place a huge amount of weight on freedom of expression. That is critical to our democracy. But yes, when there is an issue, then you have to be not afraid to go after that. And again, I think our track record speaks for itself, including recent sanctions. So this is a large regime. We are going about it, firstly, by building our capability, then putting in, we've obviously consulted on codes of practice and put out guidance. Those will start to come in effect at the turn of the year. We'll then start to focus on supervision, working with the most significant platforms so that they understand what that looks like, what their obligations are. And then, of course, there will be enforcement to make sure the regime actually works. So there is a question of how we prioritize through those things, but and it's a challenge, but I'm pretty confident.
There's a question over there.
Article 22, paragraph 1 of the UK GDPR, the right to object to automated decision-making, including profiling. So where does your Ofcom's jurisdiction end and the Information Commissioner's jurisdiction start with regard to transparency about how you've been profiled?
So that's a very good question in the sense that some of the regulation that we now see in the digital world has to work very well together. And so I'd almost rephrase that I think the issue for me is not necessarily about where things start and end, but how do we work with our other regulators so that the outcomes we see are ones that achieve what we are looking for in terms of consumers and citizens. So, for example, I think it was mentioned earlier today, but one of the reasons why we founded the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, which is not just the Information Commissioner's Office and us, but also the Competition and Markets Authority and the Financial Conduct Authority, is precisely because we all have a hand in digital regulation, and trying to understand how these various jurisdictions come together is absolutely critical. So in particular, exactly as you say, when it comes to online safety, we work very, very closely with the ICO on questions like age assurance and protection of children, because GDPR is a big part of that. And I think it's by working together and understanding holistically what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve that will get to the best outcomes possible.
We've got time for a very quick one in case somebody has another question.
It's just a kind of question linked to something someone asked earlier, but I think in the kind of AI session, the government representative on the panel was talking about kind of having the right skills and capabilities in the workforce to be able to kind of tackle some of the policy issues we're facing and the regulatory challenges. Do you feel at the moment that there is that kind of expertise within Ofcom and actually more globally through things like the international work you do, that there is that capacity in international partners as well?
It's unquestionably a challenge, but I would say that I think we're in a better place than I might have anticipated. I say that both because we're privileged as a regulator to have been able to invest in bringing in talent because of the online safety regime, and secondly because it turned out that bringing in talent from the likes of online platforms has not been quite as shockingly difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but as I had anticipated. And that's in part because I think talking to people who've joined us, they're really passionate about the mission and the purpose and making a difference for society. So we have managed to recruit quite a number of people with, technical skills, in fields like AI and various other things. It's always going to be a challenge. I think, trying to keep up as a regulator is shockingly difficult. But I think we are better equipped than some other regulators, for which I'm very grateful.
Excellent. I think that's all we've got time for. So could we have another round of applause for you two?